It's recording. It is recording. Hey friends, so for this video I thought I'd take you on a great bookish journey and show you books from different parts of the world. As I was looking for the books for this video, I realized there are so many regions or parts of the world that I just don't read about at all. And that's quite a distressing thought, so I'll make sure to diversify my reads. But for this video I've collected a bunch of different books from very different genres, some classics, some non-fiction, some middle grade fiction, just to take you on a great adventure. So yeah, let's just jump right in. So the first continent I want to tackle is Europe, with the country being Spain. So the book I chose for Spain is actually not a very popular book at all, but it's one that I thoroughly enjoyed, and it's Dog Days in Andalusia, Tales from Spain by Jackie Todd. This is a sort of memoir / autobiography written in a very humorous, light and funny way. It's about a couple that has retired and they moved to Spain. They got a bunch of dogs and are now living their best life. It's a book about them making new friends, meeting new people, and getting into situations that are hilarious, fun, and very weird, but very entertaining to read about. The next country is France, and I actually have 3 books for this country. The first being Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Still can't pronounce that really. This is a book that is a classic targeted at children, but it really is for all ages. It can be read in many different ways, and there are so many interpretations you can take reading this book. So basically, on the first layer, the story is about a prince who has fallen off the sky from his own planet and meets this pilot that had his plane broken down in the middle of a desert and is trying to fix it. And it's the story of them getting to know each other, and you just learn so much about this prince and his world. It's such a unique and very short but very powerful story that discusses a variety of different topics and that I just recommend very much. The next book is Perfume, the Story of a Murderer by Patrick Suskind. This book is very much different from The Little Prince. It's more of a mystery classic, but it's very specific. This book follows a character who was born into a very not romantic place in Paris, and the thing with him is he has an extraordinary sense of smell, like extraordinary, and soon his obsession becomes to recreate the smells and scents that he is feeling around him. So this is where things get a bit weird, because he starts with very ordinary objects such as wood or flowers, petals, and then moves on to discover that the most beautiful scents of all are those possessed by virgins, and this is where things get creepy. The book does comment on a lot of different aspects of life. I did this book for school, and actually we discussed a lot about education and talents and the importance of them. But I think the most important topic that this book talks about is morality and upbringing and the importance of childhood and psychology and all that stuff. It's all there. It's very specific. There's some murder, lots of murder. It may be a bit weird to read, but I highly recommend it. The next book is once again very much different from the previous one, and that's Piglets by Clementine Beauvais. This is actually one of my favorite books of all time. It's very lighthearted and humorous. It's a YA book about a group of girls, actually 3 girls, that have been called to be the ugliest girls in the school, and that's not a prize that usually makes people smile. And at first they are quite devastated by it, but they later become friends and they decide to go to Paris, which is somehow connected to, I love their backstories, and on the way they sell these little I don't really know what's the name for this, but like these like meatballs, but not really. They become famous on the way, and there's some TV and media coverage, which also brings them a lot of trouble and shows them a different aspect of fame that they previously considered. And I thought this was such a great, light and funny book about these 3 girls that suddenly become friends and decide to take some sort of advantage of the situation they've been put in. I did read it a while ago, so I don't know how I feel about it now, but I still would very much recommend it if you're looking for a fun read. And finally, a country for which I own a book. of that country. And that's Germany, and the book I have to recommend for this one is The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. This book is a YA historical fiction novel about a girl who lives in Germany during World War II. And it's about her growing up being surrounded by war and hearing of war and then experiencing war very violently and brutally. It's really unique because it's written from the perspective of death, and I believe that this and the fact that it's about this young, amazing girl and her growing up in Germany is all you need to know going in, because this is just so amazing and so unique and beautifully written that I think the less you know, the better. The next country in Europe is the Netherlands, and for this country I'd like to talk about The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. Once again, a book I read for school, and I actually would highly recommend the audiobook if you're into it. This is a piece of nonfiction, once again set in World War II. It's a very moving and heartbreaking book about a girl and her family who, because they're Jews, they have to go into hiding in the Netherlands, and it's a collection of Anne Frank's diary entries about her life experiencing war and being in confinement. It tackles the topics that a 13-year-old normal girl could experience, such as school, love, and friendship. I mean, not school, but education. And then it moves on to topics such as war and her trying to cope with the idea of war and seeing a world that's torn by it from her little secret room. I think it's a very important piece of writing that I would highly recommend, not because it's fun, enjoyable, though it is sometimes. There are many quotes from it that I do remember vividly because they were just so powerful, but I just do recommend it as an important piece of work I think everyone should read. Now moving on to UK, I have two books for this one. The first being The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, and this book is once again a classic. It's a story set in 19th century London, and it's about a guy named Dorian Gray who sells his soul to be eternally beautiful and young. Yeah, and there's a portrait of him that's painted, and basically the portrait ages and shows the scars of life while he just remains the same. And it's a great insight into corruption, morality, and what it's like to feel eternal, limitless, and carefree, completely carefree, and the influence of that and the morality. I would greatly recommend this book because I just found it very interesting and very original in a way, and I really, really love Oscar Wilde's writing style. It's very sassy in many places. You just can see the humor that's maybe subtle sometimes, but it's there. From the UK, I also have a very different book from that, and that's A Diary of a Bookseller by Sean Bythell. And this book is once again a piece of nonfiction, kind of memoir-y. It's about this guy that owns a secondhand bookstore in Waketown, a place in Scotland, and it's about him and his everyday struggles and fun times working in this bookstore, meeting customers, trying to help them, his problems with displays, books, industry. It was just very funny and a light book that I would recommend if you're looking for something different from the very depressing books that I also talked about today. Finally, the last country is Greece, and for that book we're going way back in time to the times of ancient Greek gods, and that book is Circe by Madeline Miller. This is a very well-known, beloved, and I completely understand why, book that talks about the life of Circe, a sorceress that is the daughter of Helios, and it's her story of growing up and being very, very much human in comparison to all the immortal gods. I mean, she's immortal too, but she's just very human. And because of her misbehaving, she is sent to an island and is kind of forced to live a miserable life, but she finds a way to turn it around and tries to be happy. And I think that's beautiful. Now I'd like to take you to Asia, and very unfortunately, something I am quite embarrassed about. I have only one book to recommend here. which is so bad. But on the other hand, that book is really amazing. And it's The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini. This is a book set in Afghanistan and spans many years of life from 1970s to 2000s. And in the background of this story, there is a war going on in Afghanistan. So the country is being torn apart, and there are these two boys that probably shouldn't be friends at all, but they are. And this is a story of betrayal and of love and of friendship. We move on from Afghanistan to America, where one of the characters is trying to rebuild his life with his father as an immigrant. It's a story about a multitude of different things that I really, really highly recommend if you want to gain some insight into Afghanistan and its people and the situation that was there at the time and what it's like to try to live after that, and I just really recommend it. The next continent I'd like to talk about is North America, and we have some more books here. So the first country is Canada. The book that I just have to talk about for this country is Anne of the Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery. I want to say it's like a YA middle grade-ish novel. Actually is part of a series. It's a 7-book long series, I think. But it can literally be enjoyed at all ages. My grandma loves it. I love it. You can love it too. The book is set in this quaint, peaceful, beautiful village on an island, I think, that doesn't exist in reality. Anyways, it's about a girl who has been orphaned and has been living in the orphanage for quite some time, and she finally seems to have found her wonderful caretakers, but when she arrives, it turns out they wanted a boy, not a girl. But Anne has just been wanting to belong somewhere, to be happy and loved and free and feel safe. And so her life changes when she is adopted by a brother and a sister who are at first a bit unwilling to take her in, but eventually they do, and this is just such a beautiful book. I love it so much. I actually continued on with the series, which I feel like is a thing many people don't do, and there is no book as charming, even if later on the series, no book as charming as this one, and as beautifully written and so peaceful. And Anne is the most cheerful, bright sunshine ever. She's so happy and vibrant and lively and lovely, and she's everything. And I, growing up, this is what I wanted to be like, to be this little sunshine in people's lives. She's not this sunshine for everyone. She does have a fair amount of trouble in the village with the people, with the teachers and other rude people sometimes, but she turns their life around to, I'd say, something much better. I just really think you should give this book a try. I know that some people get bored by it, but if you don't get bored by it, there's a high chance that you'll love it. And now we're moving on to the great grand US, which is where I have 4 recommendations for you. The first one being Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. This is a very popular book set in the 1930s in California. So this book follows 2 characters, George and Lenny, and let's just think about George taking care of Lenny, and this is kind of the thing. They're looking for a job because they want to live an American dream and lead beautiful lives, have their own farms, and just be happy. They find a job on a ranch, and things get complicated because, well, George has been taking care of Lenny for a long time. Lenny is this innocent, giant, strong, but gentle man who just doesn't control his strength, like literally strength. And one day Lenny gets into trouble with the boss's daughter-in-law, and this is trouble that George can't really take him out of, and it's just a really, really great book. I found it to be very interesting. I found the relationship between the 2 characters to be very intriguing and original, and also all the metaphors going on there. I read this for school, so I do appreciate the multitude of metaphors there, but I think it's a great book nevertheless. And we're staying sort of in the same time period with the next read, and that's The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Now, I tried to explain this in my own words, but I find the description of the book to be so well written that I'm just gonna read it to you. Invited to an extravagantly lavish party in a Long Island mansion, Nick Carraway, a young bachelor who has just settled in the neighboring cottage, is intrigued by the mysterious host, Jay Gatsby, a flamboyant but reserved self-made man with murky business interests and a shadowy past. As the two men strike up an unlikely friendship, details of Gatsby's impossible love for a married woman emerge, until events spiral into tragedy. Basically. Great focus on love and on corruption as well, and on justice, and just a great commentary, social commentary, I'd say, and a very, very intriguing and interesting read. The next book is Here the Wolves by Victoria Scott, and this is a middle grade survivalist novel set in Alaska about a girl who is trying to overcome her fear that developed after she tried to chase her mother, who suddenly walked away one day. She spent a night in the woods, lost her hearing in one ear, and is now terrified of staying alone. And one day, her dad and her sister have to go to the village, another town, to do something, and they're supposed to leave her for 2 nights. And that thought scares her to death. And then snow starts falling in the village, and it keeps on falling, and one of the villagers get hurt, and they have to be taken to a doctor. And the nearest doctor is in another village, so they have to walk through the woods, find a boat, and get to the nearest doctor. This girl is terrified of doing that, and they're walking through the woods, and they're running low on food and water. They're cold, uncomfortable, and she is not living her best life. The story follows her trying to deal with the past and overcome this fear in these hostile woods. I thought it was very beautifully written. I really love Victoria Scott's writing style, and I just think this is a very, very interesting, unique, and beautifully written middle grade book. And the last book for the US is The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. This is the Polish version of this book, which is kind of the same, so I'm just gonna hold it up because yeah. So this is a book that's set in Shaker Heights, I think, and it's about a black girl who lives in a poor neighborhood but goes to a very fancy school. And she's trying to deal with this duality because a poor black neighborhood and a fancy white school are two completely different worlds, and she's trying to cope with that and somehow connect them when one day her best friend is shot and she is a witness. And from there things start going absolutely crazy. She is facing a world without him, and she's trying to come to terms with the loss, but at the same time she's dealing with racism, which is such an immense problem, and she's trying to do something. So the world wants to know more. The topic is becoming more and more popular in media, the guy being shot despite being unarmed. The only reason him being black and being suspected because he's black of absolutely all the crimes you could think of. She can do nothing and stay safe, or she can turn this death into something more important and start fighting for justice. And this is such a powerful book that for me was eye-opening. So I highly, highly recommend this book. Wow. No, what happened here? Why is this so hard? Can you see me? Okay, quick angle change, but now we're back. It's not working. The next and almost the last book I'd like to talk about is a collection of short stories that are all set in Argentina, and it's called Things We Lost in a Fire by Mariana Enriquez. And it's a very dark, horror-esque at times collection of very powerful short stories, and each deals with a different topic. Universal, but still set in Argentina. There's a lot of things going on, and you really have to read the whole thing to understand the complexity. I mean, it really is so well written in my opinion. There are so many things playing on each other, and I read it as I read these horror-esque elements as metaphors rather than just pure horror, and that they're supposed to be a metaphor for something much deeper. They're supposed to play on the characters' fears and problems and sort of portray them through different magical, not so magical things. And it's actually even more interesting when you dig into the history of Argentina and things going on there. Many things are portrayed in these stories. Rather, honestly, they're amplified or somehow changed, but it's always somehow connected to the country. And I find it's so brilliant and so amazing, so dark and uncomfortable at times, but totally worth it. And finally, we're traveling to the last continent, which is Africa. And before you say I miss Australia and Antarctica, well, I don't know any book set in either of these places. The last continent is Africa, and we're actually going to South Africa with Trevor Noah in his book Born a Crime. The full title is actually Born a Crime: Stories from a South African Childhood. This book felt like reading The Hate U Give, but in a very different way, because this book is an autobiography written by Trevor Noah about his life growing up in South Africa during the time of apartheid. I'm comparing it to The Hate U Give because it was so eye-opening for me and I learned so much. At the same time, I learned not only about the situation in South Africa and its history, but about life in general. And one of the most powerful quotes for me from this book is connected to regrets and doing something rather than regretting not having done it then. Yeah. So one of the interesting yet very distressing things is that Trevor's birth was illegal in the first place, because at that time in South Africa it was illegal for a white man and a black woman to be together, let alone have a baby. So in the first years of his life, his mother had to hide him because the government could have taken it away very easily. As we read on in the book, we just see him grow up and we see the environment. But the most unique thing about this autobiography is that it's very educational and insightful without being overwhelming, I'd say. It's just this perfect balance of humor to real life lessons to actual tragedies to painful stories to drama, and I'd really recommend it to anyone who's looking to gain some more insight into South Africa, into its history, and into the injustice and corruption and poverty and problems that people were facing those times. Okay, I know it's been a long journey and you're probably very tired, but there are still two books I would really like to talk about because they feature a lot of traveling. I just felt like they perfectly would fit this video. So the first one is a beloved middle grade-ish classic, but can be read once again at all ages. And that's Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. And this follows a character who has made a bet that he will be able to travel the world in 80 days. And he sets on this adventure to accomplish that. And I think it's a great book, whether it is just because it's a classic that is very often referenced and it can help you understand your favorite TV show, or because it's just a really fun and enjoyable book. And I would highly recommend it. And the last book I'd like to talk about is The Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie. If you don't know Agatha Christie, she is a very well-known murder mystery author that's written a ton of books about this character named Hercule Poirot, who is a detective, like Sherlock Holmes, but different. Murder on the Orient Express is about a murder on a train that is stuck in snow somewhere, and a guy has been murdered, and basically that's kind of the premise and the idea in all the books featuring him. There's a murder and Poirot has to solve it. But the travel aspect of this is that the train has been traveling for different countries, and there may be not much feature of different places, but I still, when reading that book, I still felt the sort of travel vibe around it. I think it crosses Turkey and Yugoslavia because the book is set in a time when this country still existed, and a bunch of other countries in that area, so I would still recommend it even though it's not directly connected to traveling. So here you go. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you found out some new books that you'd like to read or are interested in. Hope you pick one up, and I hope to see you soon. Bye!